Rock and roll. Kia ora, everybody. What's up? It is Robert, and I'm joined by the big brain himself, Roger Dennis. How are you, my friend?
Kia ora, very good, thank you.
A few little flight tweaks around this morning. We've had to our itineraries have had to navigate to finally get to this point, so I'm glad you got in safe.
Yeah, nature of the beast, unfortunately.
Flying from Christchurch.
Indeed.
A few little ups and downs.
Yes.
Quick context. The first time we met were, I kind of call it the corporate Illuminati Secret Squirrel Day. It was a couple of years ago. I've told a few people the story about like how we went into this room and it was like all closed out and just gnarly brains. And I started seeing all the people that were there. I'm like, oh, this is one of those things. I was saying to
one of those things.
One of those. I was like, I felt I was about to get a tattoo. I'm like, we're flipping getting it. But it was really
Didn't
cool.
you get it on the day? Did you not get the secret tattoo?
I got the invite for the second and third, but I think we might get rings. Maybe it's going to be some type. I'm gonna do it. But no, it was really cool. But we got to connect a couple of years ago, and just some of the landscape of where you play and what you think about is always really intriguing. Obviously, you know, I like thinking in yarns and whatever, so I appreciate the time for a big brain like yourself to come in and squabble amongst the nice whiskey wall that you want absolutely no part of this early in the morning.
It's a little bit early for that, I got to admit.
Little bit. So for those who don't know, quick little context, not only are you an EHF fellow, maybe tell the viewers and the listeners a little bit about maybe sort of a minute or so with where you're at and what you're up to.
Sure. So what I do is I work typically with large organisations, helping them understand where the world is going long term, what does it mean for their sector and their industry, and how do they respond. I've been doing this for quite a long time now. I've worked with some of the best foresight teams in the world. So the Shell Game Changer team over in The Hague, worked alongside the foresight team in the Singapore PM's office, these types of things. And what's always really interesting to me is how few large organisations do this really well and how even fewer countries do it well.
So the history of where you've come to is literally at a point where you help. I don't know if futurist is the futurist the right word?
Yeah, it's one that gets used a lot, but
is it kind of like the new entrepreneur where you almost like we do that, but it's not that because there's too many like just rogue monkeys running around?
Yeah, there are a few rogue monkeys, I must admit, throwing darts at dartboards.
Yeah.
What I find is that the term futurist sort of conjures up this idea of someone saying, where's my jetpack?
Yeah.
We're all going to live on Mars. Whereas what I like to do is actually help organisations connect that to what do they do next. It's very easy to produce glossy brochures and reports talking about where the world's going to be in 20 years. Most organisations need to know what does that mean for them in the next 6 to 12 months, next 18 months. How do they respond? What should they be thinking about to keep them agile and resilient, as opposed to where's my jetpack?
The world that you exist in is clearly around thinking to help organizations, I guess, be aware, get educated, and execute and activate on, right? So if we go back a bit, how did you initially come to the space around thinking as a career?
That's really interesting. Thinking as a career, I like that.
I just made that up. The whiskey hasn't kicked in yet, but I'll get better.
That's good. That's good. So I was fortunate enough to go to university at a time when they paid you to go to university.
What?
Yes.
Piss off.
Yeah, I know. Phenomenal. It was fabulous. And
Where?
Canterbury.
They paid you to go?
Yeah, you got paid to go to university. It wasn't a huge amount, but all your expenses were covered. I can't remember exactly what it was. And I went to university just at a time when they started phasing it out gradually.
Was it scholarships, or were you just smart? Or what?
There were scholarships you could get, but generally most people were there and got some sort of fund from the government. Not a huge
Shadbolt
amount.
before Shadbolt.
Could have been.
Yeah.
I remember when they were introducing, the government at the time was introducing this, the idea of fees for university, and one minister, and I can't remember his name for the life of me.
We'll call him Bob.
Yeah, Bob. Bob came to visit and talk about it. And the uproar was so great, he had to escape through a toilet window because the students wouldn't let him get to his car through the main route.
Because he proposed that they'd have to pay.
Yes.
What an idiot. Why would you do that in a college town?
I know. It does beg a belief. But there were also marches and protests on the streets with students getting out and agitating about paying fees. So at the time, we got paid to go to university. And
what'd you get? Because you're a professor as well, right?
No, I'm not a professor.
What are you?
I just got the hair for it.
No, but you got like some crazy things to your name. What's your deal?
Yeah, so I've got I've got a couple of degrees, nothing major, but
Well, it's a bit.
yeah. So
flex on them. What do you got? You got some smart shit.
yeah, well, I got one in psychology and one in zoology.
Zoology. What's that?
Yeah. So I was really interested in animal behaviour at the time, and it was interesting because I figured out probably in my second year at university that I was being paid to access experts across any domain. And so what was fascinating to me was you could just go and talk to these people about almost any topic in the world, and they would give you an informed insight you couldn't get anywhere else.
It was like real world Wikipedia in person.
So this is pre World Wide Web days, so that level of information, the accessibility of it was very hard to get. So I became an information omnivore.
But clearly you're very curious around...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Curiosity is a real trait of mine. So my degrees involve things like art history, classical studies, German history, animal behaviour, psychology, all sorts of things. And I figured out that what you could do was, if you went and talked nicely to heads of departments and explained to them sort of your thinking, you could put almost any subject into your degree as long as they approved it. So I have got a zoology degree.
So you were a strategist as well as...
Yeah, at an early stage. Yeah. And other friends of mine just did a degree in law or engineering.
So you went wide.
But I was all over the place, yeah.
Well, so say what do you call it, animal behaviour? What do you call it?
Animal psychology.
Animal psychology.
Behavior, yeah.
So animal psychology and behaviour, what are the biggest, clearest traits that you've seen exist between nature and humanity in the modern age?
Great question.
Oh, I'm on fire, team.
No whiskey
required. No, but you know what I mean? Because it's quite an interesting... So I remember because when I would watch like the Animal Channel or whatever, and you watch like the thinking, and then you're like, whoa, is that like a boardroom? Is this like... I think about transferring it. So did you... Yeah,
yes.
what'd you learn?
So probably at the time you weren't making connections between sort of human behaviour and animal behaviour. Interesting, because I was doing a lot of human psychology and a lot of animal behaviour. There wasn't a lot of overlap, but when you look back and sort of imagine where the connections lie, as a species, humanity is incredibly resilient.
Yeah.
And so you think about examples like Hiroshima, Nagasaki, really horrible sort of situations where you think that would just be the end of whatever humanity was in that location. We build back. I think it's really interesting in the situation where the world is now, in that we have a whole range of very complex systems interacting in ways that we can't predict where they're going to go to, but at the end, humanity will survive. We're just not quite sure how it's going to look in 20 years' time.
So we actually are the cockroaches, but we're just not aware of it.
Absolutely. So the way I see it right now is that it's almost like the world is heading into a bank of thick fog. And if you took a helicopter above the fog and sort of looked into the far distance, humanity's survival is pretty much a guarantee. What shape it takes and how many of us are around and whether we're on this planet or the next remains to be seen, but I think we're incredibly resilient.
There was a guy that worked for Elon Musk come out, and he was obviously in his kind of inner circle, and he was genuinely saying he wants to die on Mars, right? He wants to get there. He knows he's not going to come back. One-way trip, giddy up and go. When you look at humanity in 2020, are you hopeful for the future here, or do you literally think we've stuffed it next?
So
unpack it however you wish.
Yeah.
There's a few layers, I'm sure.
More whiskey. The way I view it is that you can't be pessimistic and you can't be an over-the-top optimistic. Optimist. You have to be in the middle, which is this idea called realistic optimism.
Okay.
Which is, it's going to be hard, and there will be times when you think problems are insurmountable, but there's a way through. And if you simply ignore it, put your head in the sand, and think somebody else is going to solve it for you, that is not going to be helpful in any way. So you have to have a degree of resilience and realism about where the world is going, but you can't say it's all going to hell in a handbasket, because that's not helpful at all.
There's no extremes, right? It's about realistic optimism.
Yes.
I've never heard of that. It's cool. I get it. The thinking now that exists, what's the biggest industry that you think is about to get stuffed up? Like what's the one that you think most of leadership is just extremely naive to at a board level? Maybe either industry or whatever. Where do you think is the next? Maybe for New Zealand, what's the most naive industry that potentially is about to get steamrolled next?
I would say tourism.
No shit.
Mm-hmm.
Why?
So, two reasons. First of all, when realistic carbon pricing gets built into long-distance airfares, the tourism industry in New Zealand is in trouble.
Huh. Gas.
Aviation fuel.
Yeah, gas, yeah.
Yeah. So at the moment what you're seeing in Scandinavia is this thing called flight shaming, where rail trips are increasing because there's peer pressure to stay off planes.
What? As a cultural
Yes.
thing?
Yeah. So it's even in short distances. So business travellers are picking up train travel, plane travel is decreasing in Scandinavia.
So culturally, it's starting to go the other way.
Yes. The challenge for New Zealand is we can't go anywhere, really, and no one can come here without getting on a long-distance flight. And so when that gets baked into the real price, so carbon pricing comes in, then all the cheap tourists, which generally form most of our industry at the moment, don't come. And they won't come for two reasons. One, the price becomes unaffordable, and two, there's peer pressure for flight shaming. So
it'd be like, oh, it's not a cool thing to, hey, I'm going to New Zealand. It's like, like
yes.
your flight, your carbon foot.
So interestingly, I had a colleague who was over in Europe at the end of last year, and she was at a dinner with two Dutch women in their mid-60s.
Yeah.
And sort of over the course of dinner conversation, they eventually said to her, we can't believe how you can justify getting on a plane and emitting all that carbon to come around the world. In their mid-60s.
Damn.
So that's a big problem. The other thing, which might go two ways, and it's really hard to tell, is the impact of virtual reality on tourism. And,
Okay, go there for a sec, because I mess with some of that. Oh, yeah, go for it.
So if you've spent time inside a really good VR environment, so something like a Oculus Quest, and you can see pretty quickly that in a really good VR environment, you take the headset off, and the real world seems underwhelming. And so it's possible, even at this early stage of VR, to create experiences so compelling that people would want to stay in there.
Yeah.
So
this is straight up movie shit, but that's coming. Was that Bruce Willis movie that does that, and he starts living his real world in a virtual reality thing, and there's a disconnect between, I forget what the name of the movie is, but
I know what you mean, yeah.
And then they go past, it's not, even though I think it was at the Minority Report, and they go past these rooms, and then one of them, this guy's lying down, everyone's cheering for him, the next, like that type of thing. So you think virtual tourism could be an actual risk to real tourism in New Zealand?
Well, it's possibly a risk and opportunity. So, everything has two different angles to it. And so, potentially you could create exceptionally immersive virtual tours of the country, and the real thing is something to be aspired to.
Yes.
So you price
aspirational.
You price in carbon, you make it, hugely sustainable, and then people go, actually, I went to trip to New Zealand, and this is what it created out of it. These 5 things that are, helping the ecosystem restore, all these sorts of things that come out of it. But I think the low end will be hollowed out.
Interesting. So you think tourism at risk? What other industries do you think are at?
Agriculture.
Okay. Yeah, go there for a second. Yeah. Man, big industry must hate you. You just come out talking shit about all that stuff.
So with agriculture, the big thing is protein.
Okay.
And there are changes in protein in different ways. So first of all, climate change is going to have a big impact on protein consumption because of the massive impact that meat has on the environment. And then secondly, there's this thing around decreased protein consumption. So how do you sort of start to navigate this? And what we're seeing is sort of plant-based proteins coming to the fore. Mm-hmm. So if you look at someone like Ripple in the States, they produce a whole product range of milk, and it's made with the key protein ingredient being yellow pea. So they take out the animal product, they put put the yellow pea in there, and I've tasted some of those in the States. And when you taste them next to milk in the States, you can buy, which isn't very nice in the first place.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between the two. But the environmental impact is significantly less.
Yes.
So you start with that, and then you say, so if yellow peas become a really good protein source, and they are right now, then how do you then get away from agriculture being anchored to weather patterns? And so, so then you go, well, actually, so you do that through vertical farms. So vertical farms are when you take like a warehouse or something, you control every variable inside there. So including light, moisture.
Yeah, including laser spotting for energy as well, right?
Yeah, you can do all these sorts of things. Yeah. So you basically...
Not that I've dabbled with it, but I've been looking into some of that.
Yes. And so then what you do is you have this perfectly controlled environment where you can grow organic food because there's no pesticides or herbicides required because nothing gets in. And so the challenge with yellow peas at the moment is that they don't grow well in vertical farms. But then you look at something else coming down the line, which is CRISPR, gene sequencing, gene engineering, which is dropping in price just off a cliff.
Okay.
And so where things are going, I think, is that there's potential for people to engineer yellow peas that you could grow them in vertical farms.
Through CRISPR?
Yeah, so through CRISPR. And then what you do is you get the possibility of having protein farms in cities. Vertical farms, organic protein produced right in the middle of cities.
You flipping chest moved the shit out. I get it. So let's rewind back a bit. Protein.
Yep.
Game Changers documentary. Did you see it? So
yes.
So I don't know. I'm not that smart with the nutrition shit. Clearly, with my body type, I'm not looking at the calories. But what was interesting about it was some of the, obviously it was a piece around not necessarily pro-veganism or whatever, but it was around the science of protein in these different bits and pieces. Yes. And so I watched it, and I've been thinking about it, and I've said to some of the team, I'm like, I think I was like, I wonder what it would be like to try a 7-day plant-based diet. Like, see what it does to your body, blah, blah. But then when I went back to the States, this last trip, Burger King came out with this massive campaign around this Impossible Burger.
That's my next point.
Okay. And but how they did it was interesting. It's some ninja move shit. They went to Texas to gnarly cowboys with flipping redneck shit with the cowboy, all that stuff. And they were like, taste these 2 burgers. Can you tell the difference? And then they literally couldn't. And it's like, that's an Impossible Burger. It's not actually real meat. And they're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it's like all this stuff. What I thought was really interesting about it was, I was like, hold up. This is a marketing play. Because if you can make the tough guy think that this stuff is actually better, they're going to switch. But what it actually was is I'm thinking, if I'm a corporation and I'm some big $1 trillion thing, and if I know that if I can now, it's at a price point that I can have it cheaper, it is in my best interest to market that product and catalyze that to make that the new cool shit. So I actually potentially don't even think it's going to come from consumer demand. It could be from the crafting of corporates realizing that it's actually going to be more profit to the bottom line if we switch to this next thing. And so my prediction was, I don't think the people are going to demand it. I think the corporations are going to leverage marketing to change the user behavior of customers and then actually make it a win-win so they make more money and the other people think it's good. Is that the right play?
I think it's really clever.
I'm a futurist. That's done.
There you go.
That's done.
Where's my jetpack?
Where's my jetpack? Get me
some. It's interesting that you've seen the ad because Impossible was fascinating. So I don't remember the dates, but basically about 7 or 8 years ago, the Guardian newspaper in the UK was invited to do a story on Impossible. And so they flew a journalist out, and the journalist had a fairly tight list of things they couldn't talk about, but they could report that this company was developing a protein burger which had no meat in it and tasted really good. And so then would have been a couple of years after that, you could only get the Impossible Burger in about 4 places in the States. There were 2 in San Francisco and 2 in New York.
Yeah.
One in San Francisco did lunches and one did dinner. So on a couple of occasions, a few years ago, I would take clients to this restaurant in San Francisco, and it was a really famous meat restaurant. So you walked in, there's animal heads, there's the smell of meat cooking.
America.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd sit down for lunch and I'd say, look, we're a bit of a schedule. I know this place well. I'm just going to order for you. The burgers are great. And so they go, that's cool. So we'd sit down, we'd start eating the burgers. And literally about halfway through, they'd go, is this venison or is this lamb or is this beef? And what am I, it tastes really good.
Yeah.
I go, it's none of that. It's an Impossible Burger and there's no meat in it at all. And you could see them just, the effect on your face, like the whole, really?
Whoa.
Step right up.
Right.
Yeah, and
whoa.
And then because the Impossible Burger, if you tasted it, has heme in it, which is it's a substance which creates that sort of iron taste and also looks like sort of
heme
the
iron,
blood in the burger. It has all the texture and taste of meat, but it's not meat. And so from those 4 restaurants, then it went bigger and bigger. And so now, from being a few years ago where you could get it in 4 places in the States, in the space of probably 8 years, you can get it at thousands of locations. And
but
so the
with the brand. See, I think they GoPro'd it, right? So GoPro, the little, obviously, headset camera things, when they came out, they were first in the market that didn't really exist. But the name of the brand became a verb.
Yes.
And then that won through brands. Then all of a sudden you had Sony and these other action cams all trying to compete, but no one knew what the range was because they called it a GoPro.
Yes.
And it was like, oh yeah, it's like a GoPro.
Yes.
But they were saying it as the brand of the name. And it was so ninja shit. I was like, that is flipping great. So, but what I from a branding perspective, I saw, and I probably really appreciated from the Impossible Burger side was, then it's like, yeah, it's impossible. Impossible means no meat, but it's impossible, and that became a stamp, like a Tiffany's or a McDonald's. It's a trademark. It's a oomph, and so it's almost weird because the science has almost been intrinsically tied to marketing as a brand. Which is so now when the next wave comes on, you're then trying to go against the does that make sense? Like
Yes,
I just,
yeah, absolutely.
So it was quite ninja shit because it was almost like science and then just like amplified through marketing, but now they just kind of stake the grade down.
Yeah, and it's fascinating because, like, if you look at the Game Changers movie and you look at the Game Changers website, and you look at some of the recipes and the menus on there, it gets limited pretty quickly. So basically, beans, variations of beans, and lentils, and things like this.
Yeah.
But when you have people taking the same protein that's in those substances and repackaging them into, milk that tastes like milk or burgers or something like this, it becomes very interesting very quickly. And also what you're doing with that is you're cutting out a relatively inefficient conversion mechanism, which is the animal.
Yes.
And so that's when your margin thing starts to creep up.
And so my prediction actually was with it, was thinking, okay, especially America's a lot different because they have mass farms and there's a whole bunch of animal cruelty. It's a bad story, right? It's not a good story with that type of mass-produced meat and milk and all the rest of it. So the dairy side, then I think about when you think about New Zealand, and finally back to the not doomsday shit, but it's like, okay, if you think tourism's at risk as that, okay, that's one thing, not so good. You think of like agriculture, exactly to your thing, like the dairy and the farming, and I've got, I grew up on a farm. My grandparents were farmers for 50 years, the whole thing. How do you think this works out in the real world? Do you think this is a boardroom of the Subways and Burger Kings and New Worlds and stuff going, let's create a brand and let's roll that out and do this? How do you think this plays out?
That's a good question. So when it comes to protein substitutes, there's a couple of strands going on. One is plant-based, and the other is let's try and create synthetic meat.
Yes.
And
like fake Wagyu.
Yes. But synthetic meat has some fundamental challenges around this sort of basic scientific principle of organisms called the surface area to volume ratio.
Close. I was just going to say that.
I know, tip of your tongue, right? So what that means, it's a basic principle, and that sort of dictates the size of organisms and about how they get nutrition into their bodies, which is why you don't get spiders the size of this table, because they don't have hearts.
Got it.
Right? So they rely on basically air tubes bringing oxygen in. So it's a surface area in relation to the volume of the organism.
Hold up. What, spiders don't have hearts?
No.
What?
No.
Did anyone know that? Spiders don't have hearts.
There we go.
Just found out.
Who knew?
So how do they live?
Very carefully. No, with no cholesterol
Mate,
worries.
you learn something every day. Spiders don't have hearts.
Yeah. Now,
okay,
I know
so back to the ratio.
Somebody's going to look it up really quickly. I'm sure. I'm absolutely sure of that.
Anyway.
That's
we digress.
Yeah. So
great learnings.
So that means that when you are talking about growing meat in a test tube, one of the challenges that you have is that you can grow it in small vats, but when the vat gets too big, the surface area to volume ratio starts to have an impact because you can't get nutrition into the middle of the vat easily. And if you start to churn it, you destroy all the cells.
Got ya.
So
It's
when
a
you
growth
when you see these stories about lab-grown burgers, and they say we're doing it on a small scale, and the burgers now dropped from $10,000 to $3,000 for a burger, people are going, just follow that curve. In my head, I'm going, I'm not so sure, because you might come up against some basic blocking principles
to
of
get the nutrition in because of
science.
size. Yeah.
So you can't have like a 6 million litre vat of artificial meat growing because the cells will start to die.
Got ya.
So there's
Then you're going to have a scale issue.
Yeah, exactly. Scalability. So that's one of the things. And it will probably be solved in some way in the next 10 years.
But there's basically going to be synthetic versus plant-based.
Yeah.
And then both of those combined, someone's going to win through brand against whatever, and then they'll get amplified if the brands or the corporates decide that that's going to be the new cool shit, like the new smoking or like do whatever.
Yeah. So, and smoking is really interesting to watch. I mean, who smokes cigarettes these days?
Yeah.
Side topic.
Yeah.
But
we can go there.
Yeah.
We had someone in here the other day that does that for a living, sells that shit, and we're like, yo, that is tough. And then straight away his argument was, not his argument, he said, and it was like, oh, well, what's the difference between that and a kid going down to the dairy and getting, 2 things of sugar? It's like,
Yes.
I was like, if that's what makes you sleep, I know we gave him shit, but
shaky ground.
Shaky
ground.
Anyway, we digress.
So I don't think there's going to be an either or. There'll be a mix of different proteins on the market, including real. And that's where I think New Zealand has to go, is if we are going to sell the real thing, then how do you bake that into the offering? So that someone picks up a steak in Tokyo,
Brand.
scans the QR code,
Brand.
and the whole story comes up. And you go, well, today I could have chosen the yellow pea protein grown in a vertical farm, or I could just go for the story behind this.
Well, I think it's market, it's brand.
Yeah.
There's a reason you'll pay $600 for a Kanye West flipping Yeezy shirt and the $7 Kmart or warehouse or whatever thing. It's the same cotton.
Yes.
But no. But that's the Yeezy.
Yes. Yeah.
No, that's the Tiffany's yellow box.
Yes.
No, that's the Happy Meal. No, that's
Yeah.
Isn't that weird? Actually, my friend was talking about just the other day. Les Mills. She doesn't like going to the traffic bullshit people. Full makeup at 6 a.m. Whatever.
I have the
Who's done
same
that?
problem,
Same problem.
Here at 6 a.m. Such a problem for me.
But she got the on-demand app, and it was like $160 a year or whatever, unlimited courses, all the rest. And she's like, it's the greatest. And I was like, oh, you could like just get that on YouTube. She's like, no, but it's like the Les Mills, they do the thing. I was like, yeah, but like squats, like you could get that on the Les Mills. I mean, on the YouTube. And she's like, no. But, and
These are Les Mills squats.
Exactly. Yeah. But she was a marketer, and she couldn't actually see the play. And so I just kept going. I was like, but they do the press ups. They do that like Billy Blanks did that shit like 20 years ago with the Tybo shit. He's like, no. But, and so I was like, Rach, I'm literally just saying that it's power of brand. She's like, got it.
You've been sold.
It's like, but genius though, right? So brand. So maybe to that point, because one of the, maybe to change topic, but kind of the same thing, weed, right? Weed, like I don't smoke. A bunch of my mates smoke, fine. If you think about when it gets legalized or whatever, the product for export, you're not going to win on the quantity game, right?
But New Zealand can't win on quantity for anything.
I know. So then I was saying this needs to be a brand game. You need to create the flipping Tiffany's Taranaki hardcore, like straight up. Like I was like, you need gnarly branding to roll
box,
up
the purple box.
Exactly. and I was talking to one person. They say, oh no, bro, there'll be heaps you better do. I was like, you're not getting it, mate.
No.
They are doing this shit at like scales which you won't even believe. So you need to play the brand game. So do you think across a lot of these different verticals, that's going to basically be how it plays out? Because New Zealand can't play the quantity game on anything except maybe tech, right? But park that to the side. I think it's number 3 GDP, 3 export. Now it's going to be number 2 within the next 2 years.
Wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I think it's going to be number 2.
And so the thing about technology versus agriculture.
Okay, go there.
You think about the footprint of agriculture versus the footprint of tech. So,
like physical space.
Footprint.
Yep.
So, Xero, for example, their physical footprint for how much they generate in revenue versus the equivalent in agriculture. It's quite extraordinary.
That would be an interesting graph, eh? If you took the Deloitte Top 200 of their physical infrastructure of leases around New Zealand in ratio to their either turnover or market cap, whatever the shit is, that would be an interesting thing. Because I think what you'd visualize is, wait a second, that would be a really interesting study to show a bunch of iwi investments and banks and all sorts of these people that are investing into these spaces, right? Because I'm imagining you'd probably see the same thing where it'd probably just validate what the smart people in the market have known is that when it's weightless, it can go everywhere really fast.
Yes, but also bear in mind that weightless doesn't mean sustainable necessarily, because then you look at all the carbon that's used by data centers, et cetera, and then you start getting into real world complexity. So the real world isn't always hardly ever black and white, right?
Yep.
So
wish it was.
Yeah, there's this guy in the White House who would push that as well.
Oh, jeez.
So when you start getting these discussions, and one of the things that I always talk to clients about and hammer it is complex systems are the foundation of the world, and complex systems by their nature cannot be predicted. You can only sort of unpick them in hindsight. You can say, oh, that led to this and that led to that. But when you're in the middle of a changing complex system, you cannot predict where things are going to go.
And that's right now, that's happening in media, it's happening in some sport, it's happening in some tech, it's happening in different, it's happening for agriculture, it's happening in banking.
Right across almost every industry. And so the world, the way I see it, is like a series of complex systems which probably since World War II, have run reasonably well, like a series of cogs sort of meshing in a machine. And a lot of that, I think, was due to the fact that the world got carved up post-World War II by the victors. All these institutions were set up, all these rules were made, boundaries were drawn, artificial constraints set upon the world. And that ran reasonably well, give or take a few blips, until probably late 90s, early 2000s, when things started to slowly coming undone.
Well, was that tech opened up the lanes to start merging, and that's what created friction?
It would be really interesting to try and understand exactly what started causing that. But if you look at sort of the flow, sort of starts with sort of technology affecting jobs, affecting politics, and sort of working its way down, then climate change. But you've got, economies changing. So China's a great example of that. And now what you have is these cogs no longer mesh smoothly together. So some of them are jammed, some of the cogs are broken off, and now what you've got is a series of cogs which are no longer working well together, and the effect is that fog.
Yeah.
So the fog is getting denser and thicker, and for a lot of people, especially in leadership positions, what they try and do is it's like driving a car down a road, throw the high beam on. Right, we're just going to try and put more light on that until we can see what it is.
Yeah.
But what it does is throw back more noise.
Yeah.
And so you have no further insight about what direction to go. And so in that situation, what I think a reasonable organisation should be thinking about is running experiments. So effectively setting up a series of parallel, fast motorbikes that can try and see their way through the fog a bit further than the mothership.
Yeah.
Until you get visibility and you can go, actually, maybe we should do some more with that or with that. But not so much with turning the whole vehicle round to follow. Yeah. But just sort of got enough insight to start.
So that's
putting more investment in.
That brings me to the next point, right? So I call it like speedboats versus cruise ships. Be corporate, slow, blah, whatever, government council.
Yep, that's a great analogy as well because, boats always have to navigate and take into account of weather systems and currents and all these things, and they're not predictable. But as a leader, like captain of a ship, you've got to try and keep a plot a course which is going to get you to the destination. But you're always doing this, right?
Yeah. And where it looped back to for me on that was when I think about, if you say, corporates or cruise ships, and you're exactly right, how do you create these little speedboats to go in front? The tough thing to do that means literally pulling the trigger to create new opportunities with no real ROI. Yes. And it's pure expense for something you may or may not find. And when I was talking to Rob Campbell about this, he was saying, the leadership decisions when it's on such a short-term quarterly report, KPI, report to the board shit, shareholder value, just all this other shit, that literally goes against the exact thing which they should be doing.
Yes.
So it's weird because he basically was trying to say like the dynamics of what they're incentivized to do is stopping them from doing the things which usually you should do.
Yes.
And so then it becomes a quandary of, as leaders, how do you... It's almost like the expectation from shareholders need to change first to give them enough bandwidth to try create the little motorbikes to go see.
Yes.
So there's this, because what I feel is happening is then they have potential, like we need to innovate, blah, blah, soundbite, tick the box shit, but not actually go do it so they can just make sure they hit the next raise. And then the other layer I said on top of it was, and then if you have leaders in on that are more worried about their next career piece on LinkedIn looking like it's going up, they're just in defense to hold the boat, to talk about it. Yes. So then you basically get a bunch of preachers, piss all practitionership. The cruise ship keeps rolling and the flipping, it's coming, right? So is that a good way to recap what most of corporate New Zealand is doing or feeling or thinking?
Yes. Yeah. And so...
I flipping knew it.
Here we go. Futurists. Jetpack, more whiskey.
Jetpack.
So I do a lot of sessions with leadership teams, boards and exec teams. And it never ceases to amaze me how I will sit down with a group for probably 2 or 3 hours. We'll talk about some of this in detail. We'll talk about organisational responses, what sort of strategic view they need to take, how you would translate this stuff into practical measures that are,
Yeah.
that are prudent and wise. And then I'll bump into one of them, 6, 9 months later, and sort of go,
How's it going?
how's it going? And they go, it's good. And I said, so, what, did you take any of that stuff any further? You came and talked, it was great. And I go, okay, so that's good. And you're doing, oh no, it was good. And in your head you can see them sort of going, tick the box.
Yeah.
Done. And then other clients I have, they actually take this to core.
Yeah.
And they say, actually, we think it's really important to experiment. And the challenge with them that they have is that they have to then get their shareholders across the board. Because essentially, in any organisation, the challenge is how do you keep the engine room running at full speed while having a whole bunch of innovation
Yeah.
that you can bring into the engine room without corporate antibodies going, because corporate antibodies don't like innovation.
But if you look at even how the approach of, you would have read Bezos's Every Day's Day One thing. He's basically saying, it's basically saying stuff everyone's expectations of shareholding. It's always day one. We're always going to progress. We're always going to innovate. We're always going to go full stop. And it changes the thing. But when you go zoom, 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 zoom all the way out, he's not playing the game of short-term shareholder value and exec positioning looking better on LinkedIn. He's like macro dominance, long game chess shit, and it's a different approach. But you can actually see and if you look at how the business is growing compared to the average corporates, that like game plan clearly is better.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I see over here you've got a whole stack of business books, right?
Yeah, I try to read them.
Right. And so the interesting thing I find about examples like that, and also those books, so there's Jim Collins' Good to Great over there,
Yeah, that's a good one.
is you never see business literature that says, here's an example of 10 companies that tried this theory and all failed.
Okay, like the other side.
Yeah.
You see the education of the wins, not the fail.
Yeah,
Okay.
because business books like that never sell. No one's going to buy a book that says, here's 10 companies that failed following latest business fad.
They read the tactic, committed, and got smoked.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Because organisations and the markets and the environment are complex systems. So for everyone who might follow Jeff Bezos's, mantra,
Yeah,
I'm guessing there's at least 1,000 people who have just failed miserably.
and got pumped.
Yeah. And so,
So bad PR, good PR.
Yeah. Well,
Storytelling.
a whole bunch of luck.
Yeah.
What it comes down to. And once again, it's really difficult to quantify that in such a way that people can replicate because it's all these complex systems working, and the ability to absolutely replicate somebody else's success in an organisation does not come down to let's follow the 10 rules in that book because it's number one on the New York Times bestseller list.
And then when everyone does the same thing, it's like that. There's a documentary called Push, Pause, Play, and it talks about the art of creation. And that we're saying when everyone has now got with tech, everyone can create, everyone can do whatever. But if everyone just does the same thing, it waters everyone down to nothingness. But then when you have the pure talents that sift up, it's actually amazing and better for those talents.
Yes. Plus, also, I have a problem with some of those things that talk about, everyone can do this because the technology is so cheap and widely available.
It's a
Mate, have you ever been to like a poor village in Africa? You ever been to somewhere in Bangladesh?
Yeah.
This sort of Western notion that
Here's the system.
yeah, by the book, I've got the world is flat and away we go, and I can create $1 billion business. That's just a fallacy.
Well, I think the waves that have been coming, or lately anyway, it seems on social is, here's this course to sell a course and pack your bags and live in Hawaii shit, and just here I am in business class, just earning money passively, blah, blah, blah. That feels like that's that wave of exploitation for people who want the aspirations to be entrepreneurs that don't get it. That feels like a entrepreneurial pyramid scheme in the cloud. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not a thing. If there was a thing, but I actually love the idea that you're talking about with the fail. So we've got this idea to do an event this year, and it was an original idea from a guy, a mate of mine, Ben Fahey, who used to be the editor at Stop Press, was do a founder's funeral, and
Nice.
you hire out a funeral. What do you call it? With a funeral home?
Funeral parlour.
Funeral parlor.
Yeah.
And literally everyone comes up with their old business cards or logos, and they have to stand up, and then they put it to rest of like
Yes.
the fail.
Yeah. I've got a couple of those.
This-
Everyone's
oh,
got a couple,
Mate,
right?
could you imagine just but like celebrate the loss? And I think to your point as well, it opens up that. I think people are not over the. So you woke up poor, and then now you're rich. Yay! Like I think that wave of like not fake inspiration, but I know exactly what you're talking about. With like this is how everyone won. Boom, 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 boom. How did everyone lose?
Yeah, exactly. You know, what are the steps? And
Steps the stuff up.
and then also this thing around, you know, that sort of that motivational mantra crap that says just keep on going every day.
Oh,
is getting
bro.
better. I'm thinking at some point you just want to cut your losses.
Yeah.
At some point you have to actually take a hard look at it, or somebody else probably does, because you're too deep in it, and go, is that working?
I hate when I hear stuff like that saying, just knuckle down and just focus and just you got the drive. And so I think about these things. I call them the 3 T's of like time, tech, talent. Everyone's got the same time now to do stuff. Everyone's got the same tech, but if I don't have the talent, your stuff, I could love, and I give the example, like I could love rugby more than anyone in the whole world. I could have all the technology embedded into me. I could have everything. But at the end of the day, I get up on a Saturday at 5 in the afternoon. I can't put a number 7 jersey on and be better than Richie McCaw.
Yeah.
Because I don't have the talent.
Yeah.
I'm not
Especially
built
if
for
you only
it.
get up at 5 in the afternoon.
Exactly. Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like I think that back to marketing though, because that's what they're told, and that's what's been preached. And like you can do this. Anyone can launch it from your bedroom. Anyone can think, oh, just drive it down. I totally disagree. I think you need to know when to shoot it.
But also that thing, I think that whole philosophy is almost quite damaging to society, because
How so?
inequality is now at record levels around the world, basically. And that mantra is probably applicable to the 10, 15% of the population that has the luxury of, you know, time, education, some spare money, etc., etc. The majority of people just don't have the headspace to go, right, now I'm going to put some time aside in my life to think about this new idea, to talk to people with some technology. I've got a network of people that they just don't have that. And this is almost like you start to get into deep philosophy about sort of neoliberal economics and the philosophy behind that and where
does that
society's going. So this idea that the trickle-down effect works, you know, capitalism's great because somebody's going to make a lot of money up here, but they're going to spend a lot of money, it's going to trickle down and everyone's going to be lifted up. So interesting to watch. There's a guy called Ray, I think it's Dalio or Dalio.
Yep.
Ray Dalio.
Principles.
Yes. So
I know.
So he's one of the world's most successful investors. So basically from zero to I don't know how many $1 billion over his lifetime.
It's crazy.
He has come out just in the last 3 or 4 months and said the whole idea of the trickle-down economy is rubbish. It's a fallacy.
Huh.
It doesn't work. So the link between capitalism and democracy has failed. And, you know, around the world, people just aren't being lifted up. They are being hammered every day. And they're not, there's no opportunity for them to move out of where they are because they are stuck as a result of all these complex systems interacting in a way that democracy can't resolve easily.
And he's come up with that's a thing.
Yeah, he said it doesn't work. It's failed. And this is a guy who's benefited, you know, outrageously from the system, coming back and saying, the way I got rich doesn't really work for everybody else, and the system's failed. And when people who've benefited to that degree from the system start saying that, you know, it's no longer a weak signal of something going wrong. It's like a massive neon light in the middle of the road going, something's wrong.
And how this plays out, if not dealt with, is revolt.
Yes. So
In the end.
yeah, if you look at history, the lessons for how you resolve inequality are very sobering.
It's not kumbaya shit.
No.
It's break down the gates.
Yeah. And so the other thing about inequality is it's a whole series of complex systems interacting in ways that have created this situation right now. But essentially, it seems to be a result of sort of policies going back 40 years probably around breaking down unions and changing fiscal policy around taxes and a whole bunch of things which meant that So business did, thrive, economies grew, but didn't grow evenly. So it used to be if you grew up in the mid-'80s in the States, you could probably wake up knowing that in your lifetime, the wealth of your family would increase by maybe 3-4%. But at the end of the day, it was like the American dream. You'd wake up knowing that, next month, next year will be better. And that sort of continued all the way through to about, I'd say about the 50th percentile. So if you're in the bottom earners in America in the 80s, you would be able to further your lot, make things better for your family.
Not by default, but just from the complex systems that existed to keep it moving.
Just the way the system was set up, you would do better. If you were extremely rich, you just stayed extremely rich and nothing majorly changed in that. Now what you're seeing is the 90th quartile or above, so the top 10% of earners, their wealth has gone like a hockey stick, just through the roof. And middle class is just plateaued, and at the lower end, it's gone negative. And that is a situation that can't be easily resolved by politicians who have 3 or 4 year mandates. Because you can't go out and do an election speech talking about resolving issues in complex systems and philosophical debates about tax regimes. No one's going to buy it.
Yeah.
And so our current system of democracy...
It's not built from the actual problem we have.
Doesn't work so well for the problems that we have. And that's not to say democracy is failing, because there are other forms of democracy which still give representation, but not in the same way we have it now.
In the similar way, talking about the cruise ship speedboat thing, they're in the fog, this is the machine, let's keep rolling.
Yes.
We might be on the wrong boat.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I had a really interesting chat with an MP.
We won't name them. His name's, but it could be Bob.
It could be Bob. There's no MPs called Bob, so I'll look it up quickly for
Bob.
me. Yeah. And so I did a presentation to organisation in Wellington, where a bunch of MPs were there as well. And I talked through, what I see going on in the world, what it means, implications, democracy, etc. And he came to me afterwards and said, I want you to come and do that same presentation to all my colleagues, because I don't think anybody understands this.
Long game. Yep.
I'm sure I can do that. Here's my details, got my card, follow-up email, tumbleweed. And it's tumbleweed
because
people are just overwhelmed by what's going on from day to day. It's the must do this, but in politics, it's even worse.
Yeah, So I don't know if to be excited or depressed. You've kind of got me a bit gutted because I can see it because it's real, right? So let's take a spin on it. If you were to reshift politics and wave your magic little Roger Dennis wand of brain, how would you structure a different way of operating to actually address that gap?
So there's this form of democracy called representative democracy. And you should look it up because there was an experiment that the New York Times was involved with, and it was the middle of last year.
Okay.
And essentially they worked with a NGO and a few sort of thought leaders in the space. So a couple of guys from Stanford, so academics who are looking at democracy. And the sort of high-level concept here is that soundbite politics fails because it polarizes people. But if you have people in the room in a situation where you can educate them about the issues from an expert point of view, then actually they become much more rational and clear-headed. And so what this New York Times experiment did was they essentially took a slice of America, 300 people from across all political leanings, all states, genders, the whole lot, put them into essentially a conference venue for 2 or 3 days and got them to, they surveyed them before or during and after, etc. And they talked about, lightning rod issues, immigration, taxation, and employment, all this sort of stuff. And then they got their views before and after. They sat them down with experts and had these sort of rational discussions. this is how the systems work. This is what it means. If you do this, this happens. If you do that, that happens. These are the implications.
Real world Wikipedia.
Yeah,
Yep.
let's have a debate. Let's talk about it, and then now have a discussion with your, the person
Colleagues.
next to you. You know, they might be someone from Alabama talking to someone from California. That really ever happens in real life. Democrats, Republicans, etc. And what they found was that views no longer polarized at the end. They sort of centered around a much more rational and structured thought process, and that was really quite successful. But like you say, the mothership just keeps on going, and it's very difficult to change democracy.
Is the difference of that because you had people having the conversations instead of politics? And the representation for the people was the people itself, not the actual politics who were doing it for the people?
Yeah, so politicians weren't there.
Yeah, exactly. But I'm saying like the people went through the process of education and communication with the community, not the trusted people they were supposed to, which is a layer. And if you think about, brands going back to retail, brands going direct to customer, cutting out the wholesaler in the middle, straight, they are the retailer. It's, if you were to do it that way, I'm not saying it's a blockchain app and everyone gets a vote, but
where's my jetpack?
Where's my jetpack? But the idea of even that structure of we select someone to speak on our behalf, and then they all do the same thing, so they play in this game, opposed to we're the people. Let's have a chat.
Yes, yeah, and there's something really interesting there as well around that device, because that device and the software that goes on it, I think holds some promise for a different form of democracy, because people are now used to the fact that they can communicate with 10, 20, 50, 100,000 million people through that thing in their pocket. And so it opens up all sorts of really interesting possibilities around distributed democracy, having a real say in something. You can't vote on this until you've watched that video all the way through, or you've talked to 5 people. Here's 5 people in your neighborhood who understand this sort of thing. Yeah. It becomes very interesting very quickly.
Just opening up the tech, even just, if you had friends on the other side of the world and you could communicate with them with different outside perspectives.
Yes.
Because I was at Singularity University in San Fran 2 years ago maybe, and one of the things was space politics. Right? So I roll up to this
I'll tell you why I'm laughing a minute.
Space politics.
Yes.
And the goal, and it was actually really interesting framed up. They said, we all can agree that sooner or later we're going to be on the other planet. Everyone's like, yeah, all right, cool, sweet. So if we were to wipe the slate clean, stuff all the different politics and dramas and bullshit and whatever, and we're to whiteboard, and we're going to have, when we go to Mars or whatever, what's the rule? And they talked about how it's already currently broken because there's no real rule on who owns what where, but if you pick it up, it's your possession, it is your land, I guess, And then the counter to that straight away said, well, that's already broken because technically if nothing weighs anything in space, you could get a jigsaw lift up, a robot could lift up a kilometer by a kilometer piece of land, drop it back down, yay, it's America's. Goes to the next thing, it's broken, right? So, and they just wiped the whole slate clean and said, okay, if you start from scratch, what would space politics look like? And I just thought it was awesome because then it just said, well, if you could come up, I mean, they don't obviously have all the answers there, but if you were to wipe slate clean, do that, forget all the MMP, this, democracy, presidents, all the rest of it, then what I'm imagining would happen be like, hey, that could work on Mars. So then the next question would be like, well, why don't we try it on Earth?
Yeah, well,
But why do you laugh?
So,
are you a space politician now?
Silicon Valley, a very interesting and unique location in the world with interesting philosophies on life.
Yeah.
Springs forth things like Singularity, which is very tech focused.
Yep.
Which has conversations about politics and space. Just across the bay is a place called Oakland.
That's right. Oakland, baby.
Yeah.
Woo!
Which has a few social issues.
I would agree.
And my sort of reflection on this is, if having a conversation about space politics and ethics and sort of societal foundations, why don't you just look across the bay and try and solve our own problems first?
Popcorn, the kettle black shit.
Without relying on technology. Because technology, I've been saying this for years, the ethics of technology are so warped.
Yeah.
So I wrote this opinion piece, Scientific American, probably 2-3 years ago now, about the ethics of tech before it really blew up. And one of the things that really just bugs me is that the same behavioural techniques that casinos use
Okay.
are built into social media apps. So
Go
you
there.
don't want to be bugged too often or annoyed too often, like on slot machines.
Yeah.
You just want the dopamine to fire at the right time to keep you going back.
Yes.
And so social media apps are the same. If a social media app bugged you 24/7 every 5 minutes, you shut it off.
Yes.
But it doesn't. It bugs you at just the right time, so you get a little hit of dopamine in there, and you want to go back into it 10, 15 minutes later,
Yeah.
right? And so my thing is, gambling and casinos creates addicts, adults who cannot control their impulses because the behaviour is being manipulated.
Mm-hmm.
So how is it ethical to use those same techniques on supercomputers
For
in the
kids.
pockets of children?
Yeah. Jeez.
So
I'm trying to unpack that one because you're right. I get it.
So then you sort of take that back up a level and you go, so that's the same sort of group of people who are now talking about, let's do politics in space.
Yeah.
And I go, I don't think you're the right people to be having the discussion about new foundational systems for society. So the world doesn't need more programmers, it needs more philosophers.
Oh, deep. I like it. Because when I was at, so funny, it just segues in when I was at CES, along a similar sort of lines, I was with Michelle Dickinson.
Oh, yes.
And we had dinner with her and Joe, and we yarned away.
Also, did you see her video of the baby dolphin learning to...
No?
She tweeted it a couple of days ago.
What is
a
it?
baby dolphin learning to jump out of the water.
That's cool.
That's cute. It got over 1 million views.
Good on Michelle.
Dopamine
Okay,
going nuts,
dopamine.
right?
And we were having a dinner, and we were looking around, blah, blah, and we are just talking through it, saying blah, blah, and she said, you know what I'm really surprised about here, and I think it's an issue for humanity. And I'm like, oh, shit, here we go. All right, what do you got, Michelle? She's like,
Take a seat.
take a seat. She's like, have you looked around and see the percentages of male to females here that aren't promo girls at the front? And I literally started looking around. I'm like, holy shit, okay. And she's like, what do you think number is? I'm like, probably like, I don't know, 80 or 90%. She's like, it's about 95% men. I'm like,
Yeah.
I will trust your numbers. Michelle,
Yeah.
cool. And she goes, why I'm not, it's not, this isn't a male gender piss off whatever thing. I'm really concerned about this. If the future of humanity is going to get so tech integrated, we all agree, cool. If the world's brains that are showing the future of where all our generations are going to be going is in this city right now, and something to the lines of the effect of, and 95% of that influence is going to be male driven. How do you think that's going to skew the next generation if everything's built with a male eye?
Oh,
And I was like, yo, you're right. It's like the same thing, you know. A house is different if you've got 5 uni dudes in it, or 3 girls and 2 guys.
Yes.
Or 5 girls, or like you need the flipping balance.
Oh, yeah.
And I totally agree with. I was like, I think you're right, because if guys just build for guys, it's just going to be man cave 2020. Yeah, I'm not saying that's, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And I think that was a really interesting insight, because I actually think it was a threat not only on the ethics side, but actually we need to, business leaders, especially in technology and in business and leadership in general, need to genuinely think about what the split of the energy is. Because if you just go, you know, if you just chuck, I'm not saying 12 rugby jocks in the same thing, doing the future of what my daughter's 5-year-old education program is going to look like, I'm imagining it's going to be different if actual mothers and daughters and sisters, you know.
Yeah, so you take that sort of theme and then you go to any of the big tech companies in Silicon Valley, which control essentially a whole bunch of the world's information now, and you line them up in a row, and essentially, and I'm going to be pretty...
Blunt.
Yeah, it's young white men.
Yep.
And young white men who typically don't have the best communication skills. So I've been at tech conferences where there's been sessions running, and then there's been a sort of communal space breakout area for lunches and stuff.
Got it.
And there's been Wi-Fi in there. And it was one event I went to where the Wi-Fi failed.
Oh, anarchy.
And
You have to talk to people.
literally people were mostly guys, really uneasy, sitting down laptops, opening them up and still typing, even though I knew they couldn't get online because they couldn't. They were really awkwardly socialising, And so these are people who would rather IM somebody across the room than get up and have a chat. And the conversation sort of rapidly went down to, what do you think of my code? Do you like my code?
Oh,
And I'm going,
jeez.
how often do you get people together in the same? Why don't you get up and talk? And it was really noticeable. And so what you've got is this culture of these white young men who are extremely privileged because they get paid truckloads compared to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
building these mechanisms for other people to engage with without thinking through all the consequences.
Especially when you're a young dude with cash too, then you amplify money with ego and it becomes a very different conversation.
Yeah, so how many startups in Silicon Valley are dedicated to taking out my rubbish, doing my washing for me, etc., when the vast majority of the world is going, I've just got internet,
Yeah.
or I've got clean drinking water, or I can flush a toilet.
So it sounds like what you're saying is the old rich white dudes of oil is now the young rich white dudes of Silicon Valley.
That's a great way of phrasing it.
I can say that. That's
Yeah,
fine. The future of media. You dabbled much with that? Have any thoughts around that?
So when you say media, that's a fairly wide...
Communication and comms, because in a nutshell, it seems like lots of media companies are struggling, but consumption of the product is actually up.
Yeah, that's because of the behavioural techniques. I mean, people just keep on
Yep.
looking and looking and looking.
So I was thinking, say with, for argument's sake, say if you had banking versus media, right? And they have 1 million customers each. And I'm a media company here, I'm a bank company here. The banks with the same customers are making so much money with the 1 million customers, and then the media company with that 1 million customers is losing money, right? Do you think, what's your headspace on where you think the world of either consumption or business models or whatever going? Because it seems pretty funky that people consuming more media and content than ever, it is becoming an increasing asset that people want and commodity, yet the businesses behind it, many have either struggled, gone under, hurt, whatever else as well. Is the model broken, or do you think things just need to shift with different content or platforms or whatever?
So there's a few different ways you could tackle this. So if you look back through history, you see things like the invention of radio
Yeah.
was going to kill, socializing and discussion. The widespread distribution of newspapers was going to kill conversation and discussion and
The
community.
TV to the radio.
Yeah, well, exactly. All those sorts of things. And so one part of the answer to that question, I think, is there's always something new. But the other part is we're in uncharted territory because of the scale and reach and sophistication of the technology. So this comes back to the behavioural mechanisms that create addicts with phones. So I've got a young son, a teenager, and one of his mates always wants to get the latest iPhone when it comes out.
Yes.
And he's broken 3 of them.
Oh, jeez.
And so literally in the last 3 years, he's had 3 new iPhones, and each one he's paid, he works part-time for his money.
Yeah.
But I keep saying to him, why do you want that? Because I have a trusty iPhone SE, because it's small and fits in the pocket,
Yeah.
that runs the same software as your beast there.
Oh, but it doesn't have that wide angle, man. Does it?
Oh,
But I know what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
So if the camera is really the only thing that's different.
Pretty much.
And this guy is just hooked into the idea that he needs the latest and greatest. And that sort of comes back to Michelle's thing at CES. The other thing that gets me about that is consumption. So this consumption mantra is wrong,
Yeah.
and it's not going to end well.
So I have been thinking about this a little bit, where it was around the idea of someone asked me, "Oh, have you watched this thing?" I was like, No, I haven't." What do you mean? I was like, it's weird. Like when you create stuff, you don't actually consume. So I haven't actually been consuming much lately. I've literally just been creating.
Yes.
And it's actually worked out. It's been just a different mindset of I think I want my phone up to create, not down to consume.
Yes.
And I've had this idea of like, I'm not saying it was an app to do both, but the idea of am I being creative in doing, or am I just getting sucked into it?
Yes. And it's really interesting because, so the media thing, coming to that again, just the plethora of stuff that's available in every different area. So I love my music. I used to DJ on student radio.
Go on.
Years and years ago, obviously.
DJ RD with the ones and twos.
I was pretty terrible, I think, actually. So I've got some friends who are still DJs, and I still consume all sorts of music. So everything on the spectrum from classical through to house. I don't really like death metal, but, pretty varied content. And I have some friends still DJing, and one of them stopped doing it recently. And I said, why? He goes, I just can't keep up. He said, it's just too much. He says, no longer drink from a fire hose. He says, you just can't drink at all.
It's a river.
Because there's just so much stuff, and it's really, really difficult to pick your trusted source. So I said, did the comparison, have listened to this guy and this person or that source. He just went, this is too much. I just can't. I'm just sort of tuning out. And I thought, for someone who's so passionate about music, this guy's been DJing for 20 years, really love his stuff, but I just sort of go, God, if he's tuned out of it.
Yeah, what the rest of us?
Yeah.
So,
and that's when it comes to news, for example, right? So this whole thing about news is fascinating, right? So
not just fake news, yeah.
Well, you're talking about media companies, like 1 million customers of banking, 1 million customers of media. So the media company would then use AI to create news because it works really, really well. And you're seeing some of the stuff,
the visual stuff,
producing quite astonishing results. And not only like AI text-based news, but AI
fake faces.
Yeah, avatar style stuff working. And we're still in really early days of that. But you can absolutely see where that's going to go.
Yeah. And
so then you get to this whole thing around trust. So where is your trusted source, right? So
Bob,
there we are. Bob always comes back up again. So Facebook, for example, has got this VR lab, where they are scanning people. And the scanning process right now takes a couple of hours maybe. And it creates a photorealistic avatar, which they can then animate in VR.
Of you.
Jeez. And so when you see where VR is at right now, and then you can see what they're doing in the lab, and you know how fast technology cycles are going, then the fake news conundrum we're having now is going to seem like child's play compared to what's coming down the line, unless democracy has changed significantly. Because democracy right now is being eaten from the inside like a virus. The foundational principles of democracy around freedom of speech are the very things that people are using to kill it.
You've got me depressed again.
All right, so you need
Thanks, Roger.
Democracy needs to be reinvented because I read a really interesting paper from an academic in the States from a network. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. And the paper was written 2 years ago. And one of the highlights this colleague of mine sent through, and she's a really sharp, considered thinker, was people underestimated the influence of the internet on democracy and news. And I fired back at her and said, have you spent time in VR?
Yeah.
Do you know what's even coming? Because if you think it's a problem now,
you wait.
You just wait.
Jeez. Before we finish off, we do a quick little thing. Right now, what are you listening to?
Oh, we have to stop. We have to find out if spiders actually have hearts or not.
Okay,
do we know that?
Kanan, find it out. Do spiders have hearts? Google that shit.
They do.
No way! That's my whole 3 years of zoology gone.
Oh.
They don't have blood per se.
Or they don't have blood.
Yes, there we go.
Yeah, they do have hearts.
They do have hearts, but no blood.
I was close.
Because they fill up with air?
No, it's like their own type of...
Oh, jeez. It's a thing. They got spider hearts.
But it's still a surface area to volume ratio. When they get to a certain size, they can't go any bigger.
Oh, okay.
So there we go.
All right. Yet. Oh, jeez.
Yeah. I'm glad we fact-checked that one.
Yeah,
that's
good,
excellent.
Cool.
Woo!
I'm going to get my emails be like, Remy, this flipping guy doesn't...
Yeah.
I'm actually I'm a zoologist from flipping...
Yeah. So that guy...
Calm down, Bob.
He was crap.
Calm your shit down, Bob.
Forget all the philosophy about democracy. These spiders do have hearts, and that guy was rubbish. There we go.
They'll find
Discredited.
There would be like a debunked podcast myth about it.
Yeah.
So right now, what are you listening to?
Music-wise? Or?
Yep, music and podcasts. What are you listening to?
Music and podcasts. Apple Music sort of changed my my music, which is great because I hate commercials on radio, being a student radio guy.
Yeah.
So Apple Music is extraordinary because it's just great curated music, just rolling all the time, advert free.
Got it.
And I'm happy to pay for the monthly sub to have no commercials.
Yep.
Podcast wise, wow.
You'd be into some gnarly shit.
Yeah, so there's a guy called Shane Ferris
Okay.
who runs a website called Farnham Street, and he is really interesting. So he
Sounds like a thinker.
talks about complex systems and sort of mental models and paradigms, and has interesting speakers on his show.
Cool.
Azim Azar, Exponential View out of the UK. He's interesting. Plus a whole mix of random stuff. So there's occasionally some good BBC things that come down. If I'm on a plane, I'll often just pick out a random subject. So that I was listening to something about the foundation of Catholicism.
Oh, jeez.
And it's like stuff I have no idea about.
But
it's really interesting to get insight on because you learn stuff you'd never otherwise. Information omnivore, right?
got it. Yeah.
So,
So a bunch of random stuff. And
yeah.
what are you reading?
reading is a challenge for me. I've got 3 children, and on no exaggeration, my reading pile from the floor is about that high.
There you go.
And I have to be very selective about what I pick out and what I read.
Yeah.
I would love to be reading a whole range of stuff, but right now it's typically something comes along in my work or useful for my business, and I'll just pick that up and just churn through that straight away and then get the next thing.
Got it. And what are you watching?
What am I watching?
Any cool shit?
Yeah, so been watching Sex Education on Netflix,
Oh yeah.
which is great. If you've seen that,
No.
it's really interesting.
All right.
Funny and insightful, sort of not quite coming of age stuff for teenagers,
Got it.
but it really looks at a whole bunch of stuff which sort of tap into sort of feminism and women's issues and sort of teenage angst. I've got teenagers, so it's
Yeah,
relevant.
you're getting in that world.
Yeah, decoding Bill Gates' brain.
That was cool.
Yep, that was interesting.
That was cool.
The Great Hack,
Yep.
the Cambridge Analytica stuff. I try and mix documentaries with trash.
Yep.
Because trash
So
is
Real
good.
Housewives. So you're on the Real Housewives. Yep. Yep. You mess with that. Okay.
So at the end of the day, when your brain's been going 100 miles an hour, but fried,
Yeah.
getting on a plane and watching some trash, just sort of...
Decompress.
Yeah, I used to get on planes and try and smash out some more work.
Yeah, that's a rookie move.
But then when I landed, I could hardly get up my seat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'd try and decompress with trash.
Good mix. If people want to check you out, where can they go? What can they do? If they want to engage, check with somebody thinking, website, whatever.
I'm easy to find online, rogerdennis.com, @rogerdennis on Twitter. Most of my thinking goes to clients exclusively, so occasionally if something's really relevant, I will blog it and also put it on Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but that's about the extent of my public socials.
Mega. I really appreciate your time, bro. It's getting a good yarn. We went in a lot of different directions. I knew we would. Appreciate you making the jump straight off the airport into the cab right here to join us. So I really appreciate your time, my friend.
Fabulous.
Great to
Good
see you again.
conversation.
I'll see you at the next Corporate Illuminati Day. I think, did we do the 2030 rugby thing together? Were we in that one together?
No. Oh, yes, I did one of those in Christchurch.
That's right. Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did the Auckland. I saw your name on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you at the next Corporate Illuminati
Excellent.
evening.
Do the secret handshake and
yeah.
we'll be in the door.
I'm designing the tattoos and we're getting the flipping rings. All right. Enjoy the day, everyone. Been joined by the one and big brain himself, Roger Dennis. Awesome chats, my friend. Have a good day, team. Cheers.
Thank you.